G'day, Dons fans, and welcome back to Don the Stat. For just the second time in 12 months, we're behind the microphone following an Essendon win, and wasn't it as sweet as we remembered? A 3-point victory against the Giants had plenty of nervous moments. It was scrappy, but it was brave. It was organised, and for a team that had seemingly forgotten how to win, had 6 teenagers and 11 players drafted to the club since the 2023 National Draft, it was mature. I'm Jonathan Walsh, and with me to talk all things about that win and preview our round 20 clash against the Hawks is my co-host Ian Hume. Jimmy, how's things, mate?
Hey there, Jono. How much better is it to be sitting here after a win? It's been so long. So, I think we've all sort of thought and projected about what the draft is going to be like, but I say screw pick one. That's the sort of win that is worth so much more than a draft pick or the position there or the 4 points. It's the sort of thing that could be the start of something special, given how many young players are out there. And for so many of them, it was their first taste of a win or a win as a collective. So look, here's hoping we're looking back in a couple of seasons. We're pushing deep into finals and saying that this was the turning point. How are you doing, mate? Are you as excited about it as I am?
Yeah, for lots and lots of reasons. For myself, of course, I enjoyed it as much as, well, most. I think there are a few Dons fans out there that probably saw the value in having an honourable loss. But yeah, I think, I took Dad to the game. He hasn't been to get to as many games as he'd like over recent seasons. So to be with him and witness that win was really special. To see a win for Dean Solomon and a smile on his face was great. And then, yeah, the young players and the members that turned up to the game, I think it was brilliant. And look, I'm not as big on the player that a lot are projecting it to go in pick one, and we're actually going to talk about that later in a segment that we prepared last week when we had pick one and ended up cutting. But yeah, no, I'm big on winning and teaching winning habits, mate. I think you learn a lot from that. And I think for a team like us with so many young guys, to get that buy-in and for the coaches to be able to say, trust us, this is the way that we need to play and these are the things that need to happen and good things will come from it. I think you need some wins along the way to prove those points. And I think as a coaching and learning tool, it's a big step forward as well. So yeah, I'm really happy. And I mean, Solly said it in his press conference, but there's so many people at the club that are putting in so much hard work at the moment, the players and the 23 guys that we see run out on a weekend. But there's so many more people behind the back office and admin staff and membership staff and media and comm staff and the poor people that run our social media pages that get abusive messages and all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah, working in a footy club can be a really dark place when the team's not winning. And, yeah, for them, I'm really chuffed that they got a little bit of, some sunshine through the clouds, I guess.
Yeah, indeed. Look, before we do review that fantastic result on Sunday, I want to give a big thanks to Jack Trevor and Curtis Mazza for joining the Patreon this week. Also want to give a big shout out to the patrons that sat with me to watch the game. So some of these names are familiar: Josh, Craig, Jeremy. We also had a newcomer in Ashwin. So it was really great to share the moment with some passionate Essendon fans. And we have agreed that seeing as all 5 of us sitting together was clearly the reason why we got over the line. We have to all sit together in the same spot at the next marble game for superstitious reasons to make sure that we win the next one as well. So, section 40, level 3, row V, that's ours. And at least until we lose.
Yeah, I mean, we're a funny bunch, aren't we? I actually made sure that when I got home that night, I remembered exactly what I was wearing, so I can pull it out of the wardrobe again this week and put it on to make sure I get it right. So, yeah, thanks to Jack and Curtis for jumping on. It still astounds me that the Don the Stat community keeps growing, particularly, I guess, in a season where there haven't been too many happy moments for Dons fans. So, yeah, welcome aboard to those two, and yeah, I hope you get a chance to enjoy the community and take part in the chat, and then also hopefully see you at a game soon for a drink and hopefully celebrating another win.
Indeed, and we'll be at our usual haunt of Founders Bar on level 2, just upside Gate 4 at the MCG. All are welcome, whether it's your first time or your 50th time. Make sure you come along. Well, look, getting onto the game itself, it certainly wasn't pretty. It certainly wasn't clean, and we certainly had a whole lot of luck with the way the opposition played and executed their skills. From an X-score perspective, we were actually well beaten. But stuff all that, because as I said earlier, we've finally seen a win. And Marble may have only been a third full, but there's been few occasions where there's been as much joy at the final siren as there was on Sunday. I'm actually one of the fortunate few that's actually seen Essendon's other win this year live over in Adelaide, but especially for those who it's been over a year since they've seen a win live, it certainly was cathartic to experience that joy finally again.
Yeah, it was. There was only was a tick over 14,000 people there, I think, but it did really feel like a lot more than that. The crowd was really loud, and the way I think we played inspired that too. I think the crowd's really warming to these young players and the attitude that they're taking to the game, and seeing players really buy in and celebrate defensive acts. That's new and something we haven't seen a lot of. I noticed Artemis in game number 1. Jordan Ridley got a big spoil where he killed the ball, got it over the boundary line for a throw-in, and Artemis ran up to him and gave him the double high-five. Alashka was celebrating tackles. There was, fist bumps and cheers. I saw Mason Redmond do the double-hand cobra when there was a big spoil from, I think it was Reed at the time, got it out of bounds. So I think the crowd's really, Essendon fans are really buying into that as well. So I think for the first time in a long time, we're starting to see, and Solly talks about it a lot, and probably credit to him for being so transparent about it, is we're starting to see elements of the brand, for lack of a better term, that we're trying to play, and it's becoming a little bit more identifiable. And even in the losses against St Kilda and Brisbane, it was there, just not for particularly long. We saw more of it on Sunday, and I couldn't help but, you get carried away after a win, don't you? And you start to think about all kinds of things. But I walked away thinking that, if 14,000 Essendon fans can make that much noise in a game when our season's gone, what's it going to be like when this group are playing and winning finals? I know we've still got a long, long way to go. But yeah, when the playing group and the fan base are on the same page, there was, and there's that much noise from 14,000. I can't wait till it's, a packed MCG or a packed Marvel against an Essendon home game against, either a big rival or even an interstate team, and we're dominating the crowd. The noise is going to be something to behold. I think we've got the best fans in the competition. We've got this young group who's really working hard to inspire us, and I think they're starting to pull closer together, which is exciting. So, look, lot of things to get right first before we get there, but I was pumped with it, mate.
Yeah, you're right. You're right to mention the youth of the side, and I think that was really expressed in the way in which they played. There was certainly a lot of effort and a lot of hard work from players who may not have the same, level of hardship or, level of weight on them that some of the more senior players have because of the history at Essendon. It was a team who ran out there was more than half the side with under 50 games played. And I believe, based on what I've heard from others speaking about it, that we were the youngest side that's been put on the park all year. It seems like what Dean Solomon, as you sort of say, has been talking about throughout his tenure as a standing coach, finally showed some output on the field.
Yeah, I did the sums before. We had 6 teenagers playing, 4 20-year-olds, a 21-year-old, as well as 2 24-year-olds in Bryan and Reed, who are yet to play 40 senior games. So it was a really, really young group by age and experience. But 8 of our 10 goals came from forward half chains, 4 goals too from ball ups in our forward 50. So, it wasn't a win where, we've won games in the past, I guess, where we've had to rely on Sam Durham playing a blinder or Zach Merritt playing a blinder. Go back a couple of years, it was Jake Stringer kicking straighter than he did on Sunday. So it was sort of individual talent was getting us across the line. But I think that's the bit that I liked on Sunday. I was trying to give votes post-match, and there were standouts. 2 or 3 guys were brilliant, but it really was a win that was on sort of team ethos, team effort and team grit. And, really just the first time we've seen that forward half game in a long time be able to get us a win, but also some scoreboard pressure too. So, it wasn't pretty. We're not hanging that game in the loo for its aesthetics, but in terms of seeing a team that's going to scrap and fight and claw their way to victory, well, we got plenty of that, didn't we?
Yeah, indeed. You mentioned requiring a player to play a blinder. Well, I thought, at least for us or our perspective, Jake Stringer did play a blinder probably in his top 5 games that he's impacted for Essendon. But look, you're right there. The biggest sort of impact and expression of that effort was the tackling numbers. We had 71 for the game, which was our second highest for the season, behind the Gold Coast clash, which, unironically was another one of our better performances from the year. So obviously there is some correlation between the amount of tackles we have and the level that we're performing at. But I thought it wasn't just the tackles themselves. It was the way the team was really able to rush the Giants with their disposal because of the way we approached the contest and when they had the ball in hand. that really helped stall them and their ball movement. So in particular from the back half for the Giants, we knew going into the game that the Giants are a team that likes to score from the back half, average 25 points per game from turnover in their back half, for example. And in the prior game we played against them, they actually scored 37 from this source. So it was a big watch. Well, we actually kept them to only 17. Part of that had to do with their inaccuracy, but to have them down on their regular performance, especially against us as a side that has really struggled to stop teams from scoring from the back half, was a really pleasing result. So a big tick for that part of our game.
Yeah, on average, teams score, this is competition-wide, 10.3% of the time they get the ball in their defensive 50. So 10.3% of the time they go from defensive 50 all the way into their forward line and score. And the Giants are the number one ranked team in the competition this season in that aspect of the game. They go at 12.6%. They win at 13.5% on Sunday. So still above, not just above AFL average, but above what the Giants do on a weekly basis. So there's some work to do there. But the flip side to that is we also had 18 tackles inside 50. The AFL average is 10.8 and the Crows are number one at 12.7. We were 18th going, or still are 18th, averaging 8.5. So, big upshoot there in terms of how we've been performing in that area this year. And on top of the 4 goals too, we scored from forward 50 ball ups. We also scored 4-2 from forward half turnovers. So, big tick in that aspect of the game, mate.
Yeah, indeed. And I think we're going to show a clip here. And again, if you want to see us respond directly to the clip, you can see that on the YouTube video of this episode that you thought really exemplified that pressure. This is the last play of the second half where, as a team that has given away a lot of red time goals, this is where we've often been very vulnerable in the situation you're about to show. So talk us through what you see here on this clip, Jono.
Yeah, just as I get it up, I just want to frame it first and foremost. So this is, as you said, just near the end of the second quarter, and red time goals have been a big problem for us for a long time. We're 3 points ahead on the scoreboard, which ends up being the final margin, and this is a part of the game where for a long time we've been really, really vulnerable. We spoke last week that we started to see a shift in the St Kilda game and then more clearly against Brisbane with us coming up at the ball carrier. So the example that I used last week was Harry Jones coming up to tackle Berry and didn't quite nail the tackle, and Berry was powerful enough, strong enough and clean enough to execute under pressure, and Brisbane were able to get a goal. This went up again against the Giants and we executed it a lot better. Granted, we played against a team who's probably not, definitely not as good as Brisbane are, but this is still a part of the game that they execute pretty well. And I thought this was a really good example of where we were able to perform really well. So it all starts with a stoppage, and we'll let that play through. So we use the extra number to be able to get the ball out. But because of the Giants' pressure, we have to kick long down the line. And then they win the ball back. So the first thing that we see here, and I'm just going to pause, is our players running up to close the space. And that's the bit that I really want to emphasize here. So in the past, I suspect we probably would have just retreated and corralled in this example. But what we're now doing on a more regular basis is coming at the player with the ball to try and force them into making a decision. So it's a really, really good chase here. So it's a sloppy handball down to his ankles, but they're clean enough to gather. And then again, we see a player turn around and go and provide frontal pressure. That means leaving his man, and we're vulnerable to the overlap. But if we then roll this and watch what happens, the next player in the chain comes up. So it's Archie Roberts there, who just puts his head down and sprints, and then gets all the way forward. And then we see it again and again, until finally the siren goes and we're able to effectively prevent them from scoring. So I thought, Humi, that was a really good example of where we were able to execute really well and apply that sort of pressure that in the past we haven't been able to, and get a really good outcome for the team.
I think another thing that to build on what you highlighted there, the pressure we were creating on the ball carrier, what it meant was we were also able to create a whole lot more stoppage situations where we had the opportunity to reset. So we actually had 96 ruck contests for the game, so situations where the ruckmen were going up for a ball up. And of those, 75 were around the ground. So our average for ruck contest in a game is 80 this year, which is the worst in the competition. The league average is 90. And given it wasn't a high-scoring game, a lot of those ruck contests in some of our other games have been centre bounces because we've been giving up 20 goals. So there's going to be 20 or 30 of those being centre bounces. So there's a real high number of around the ground stoppages, which is not something we've usually done as a side. So I think that sort of flowed on from that pressure, and it really allowed us to constantly reset and start again.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It gave us, because of that, gave us a lot better structure behind the footy for sure. We were plus 13 in contested ball and plus 17 in clearance, and 16 of that was from stoppage clearance. So, centre clearance was all but equal, but it was stoppage clearance where we got the ascendancy. I think for context, in terms of the way that the two teams played the game, we rolled up a half forward to the contest, whereas the Giants held 6 forwards and 6 defenders. So we did have a +1 at the contest, and with that extra number, you'd hope to win more of it. So, big tick in our contest and clearance work, but also recognise that we did have an outnumber in that part of the game. But what I really liked, mate, was we got a clearance 81% of the time. We won first possession and kept the Giants to just 64%. So 64% of the time, only 64% of the time the Giants got their hands on the ball were they at first at a stoppage or a centre bounce were they able to get a clearance, which means 36% of the time, let me do my maths accurately, we were able to strip the ball off them and get it back or force another stoppage. And to put that in AFL context, the AFL average is 74.4%. Bulldogs are ranked number 1, 78.8%. And Carlton are ranked 18th at 70%. So we went better than the best at 81% and kept the Giants well below the worst. And I thought our contest work was really, really strong to win it, to strip it off them and force another stoppage if we didn't win it. So it was a really pleasing aspect of the game.
Absolutely. And I think from that clearance dominance, it's easy to look at the direct numbers and the direct scores we got from clearance. I think around the ground stoppages, we've only got 9 points, but the stoppage wins give you territory, and that's when you create further opportunities through pressure. Yeah, and I think there's a tendency to think about the clearance and wanting to score directly from clearance. And from stoppages outside of our forward 50, we only scored 2 behinds. So we weren't necessarily directly scoring from those stoppage clearance wins with that dominance that we had. But those stoppage wins give you territory, and that's when you can create further opportunities through pressure, which we did through 28 points from front half turnover, which is 6 above our average for the year. I think that's where finally having competitive small/medium forwards that can pressure the opposition is so important. Kako Alashka and Archer Day Wicks certainly provided that this week. They had 18 tackles between them, and of those 18, 9 of those occurred inside our 50. Our season average for inside 50 tackles per game is only 8.5. So those 3 on their own beat our season average. So another real big tick, and something we'd been calling for quite some time to get a bit more pace and tackling pressure in our forward 50, and certainly paid off this week.
Yeah, you're right. We could have and should have made better use of that clearance dominance. As you said, outside the 4-2 from forward 50 ball ups, we only scored 2 more behinds from clearance for the game. So to get that amount of clearance win and not really put it on the board was, an area that we need to improve. But I think given where this team has been and in terms of win-loss and also what it's been through over the last 18 months with, injuries and change and coach changes and all of that, and then you look at the youth and inexperience of the side, we're not going to get the perfect game of football from these guys. So I think what we have to accept is are we and did we execute the fundamentals of the game better than what we have been? And I think the answer to that is a resounding yes. And ultimately that was the difference between winning and losing. So big tick there. Just a little bit of a stat I really liked. You and I were pretty disappointed and critical for Hussein Al-Ashka being dropped from the side a couple of weeks ago. We thought he was contributing through 450 ground balls and scoring. But he was sent back to the VFL clearly to work on the defensive aspects of his game. I think he had, 9 tackles the week before or something, and then came back into the side. And he's now played 6 career games. He's had 11 tackles across his career, and 6 of those were on Sunday. So he went 5 games for 5 tackles and then had 6 on the weekend. So I think, VFL can be seen as a punishment. It can also be seen as an opportunity to learn and develop your game, and certainly a big slice of humble pie from myself, because we sent him back there with a purpose. He went and executed, and credit to him, and then brought that to the AFL. And then not only did he execute it, he celebrated it too, and it just brought so much energy to his teammates. So, really, really pleased to see that part of the game, Hughie.
Yeah, and I think just, again, on the stoppages, it certainly gave Nick Bryan the opportunity to shine. And I thought, of all the games that he's played, it was his first complete game as a ruckman. He did it with his taps at the throw up. He did it with his follow up work, which I think is probably the bit that's been missing from him up to this point of his AFL career. He impacted around the ground and then on the scoreboard. So getting forward and being able to kick 2 goals, as I said, it was his most complete game as an Essendon player, as a ruckman. Admittedly, he did come up against a less experienced ruckman this week in Madden, which hasn't been the case in previous weeks. So you do have to weight his performance against that. But still, to see him provide that level of dominance in the game gives me a lot more confidence that he could be a competitive piece in the long term, which I have had some doubts as the year progressed, being, the caveat being, he is obviously coming off an ACL injury, and you've got to give him a bit of time for that. Also, it was noticeable that, in the third quarter after we had our burst and kicked away by 4 goals, it was only when Bryan went off the ground that the Giants were really able to stabilise it and sort of get back into it. And Bryan was on the bench, so it really further showed his impact on the result for us.
Yeah, it was really an impressive game by Nick, and we did talk about it in our preview, didn't we, that he was the player that if we were in Dean Solomon's shoes, we would challenge to give us a real lift, and he did that. He had to battle, or he's had to battle against players much bigger and much more experienced than him throughout this season, which is a big ask in his first year as a number one ruckman and also coming off that ACL injury. But on Sunday, he got a chance to go up against a ruckman that he's more physically developed than and took his chances really, really well. I actually was thinking back to David Hill when he was at a similar stage of his career to Nick, and Hilly used to be able to get himself up to play against the best ruckman in the competition and really challenge them and do really well. But then when he had a matchup that he you would have expected him to get the upper hand, it was almost like he got a little bit complacent, or he wasn't quite as switched on and would often get beaten in those matchups. And Nick took his opportunity to give the team some real ascendancy. One other thing that I liked, mate, is I watched Peter Wright really closely when he was in the ruck, and mainly because I was actually worried about how his knee would hold up. But he's had better games this season as a ruckman, but he still held his own. What he did do that I really liked, and he talked about sacrificing for the team, is he ran Nick Madden into the ground. He took the 19-year-old up and down the ground when there was a stoppage in our defensive half of the ground and we won the contest, which we were doing more often than not. He spread really, really hard forward to drag Madden with him. And then if there was a repeat stoppage, Madden really laboured to get back. And what it meant was that often, obviously Nick Bryan was resting at the time. By the time Nick came back on fresh, he was coming up against a young ruckman who just had to run up and sprint up and down the ground for a few minutes and was pretty gassed. So as the game went on, I thought that was really telling. And Madden didn't have much of an impact at all in the last quarter, and Nick played a really vital role, as did Peter Wright, kicking what ended up being the match-winning goal.
Yeah, really good for him to execute there as well after all the running that you pointed out that he did there. Turning to another player, and we did have a debutant this week in Jackson Artemis, and he didn't set the world on fire. He did a couple of neat things, but what his presence did do was allow us to move Jacob Farrow further up the ground for really the first time this year. And I think it's allowed us to see there's a lot more to his game than just a halfback distributor. And I think what most impressed me was some of the marks he took. He doesn't seem to have a big frame, but he did position himself cleverly to protect the fall of the ball and take them. Plus, getting him up the ground, we get the advantage of his excellent kicking inside 50, where it can be more dangerous than potentially at halfback.
Yeah, I liked what I saw, mate. He made a couple of errors, but everyone did. He didn't look out of place. He didn't look flustered. He brought a lot of energy to the team, and you're spot on about what it meant for Jacob Farrow. He's averaged 3.4 possessions forward of centre this season. He had 8 on Sunday, including 4 inside 50, and he's got exceptional vision. His ball use is really good, and he's calm and composed. It was only a 2-metre handball to Sullivan Roby, but given the pressure in that situation, his ability to execute that was really impressive. And that mark that he took to bring up his second goal was exceptional. We talk a lot about the power of Sharp and Roby. I think Farrow is just a strong one-on-one on those two. He's hard to tackle. He doesn't get pushed off the ball. He's really strong overhead. I really can't wait to see him running through the midfield as his career progresses. I think he's someone that's going to, you put him and Nick Martin in the forward half of the ground, rotating between half forward and midfield and a bit of wing, then it's a very very different proposition moving the ball inside 50 than what we've had in years gone by.
Me too. I think just reflecting again on the last quarter, that the thing that stands out was the ability to keep fighting back. And again, it was driven by the younger players. So that sequence that you mentioned there that ended in Sullivan's goal was almost all down to the actions of the 21 and younger crowd. I think it was just great to see the continued response from the side when we were headed by the Giants. It would have been so easy for them to roll over and allow the Giants to kick a couple in a row and get some space clear. But the fact that the team as a whole kept fighting was a really great response, and they're ultimately rewarded with the win, both the players and us as the fans.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. It was really, really well done, and we use player ratings as a bit of a reference point here. But if you want to have an example where they don't quite stack up, Hussein Al-Ashka was the 4th lowest rated player on the ground in the last quarter, right? But he got that build up to the Roby goal. It came into the air to him in a 2-on-1 contest against 2 players that are taller than him, and he was able to bring the ball to ground. So huge effort to be able to just do that, right? Because intercept mark there, we're outnumbered, they get slingshot, away they go, and Dagent signs. That then became a 3-on-1 contest at ground level. So before Farrell and Roby were able to get across, the Giants got a 3rd player there, and he was able to provide pressure or apply pressure at ground level, and then also multiple tackles to win that free, and then ultimately, help us. The ball spills to Farrow and Roby gets the goal. I've watched the replay a lot over the last couple of days, and that the joy on Huss's face when the goal is scored is pretty addictive, and not often. Again, I said it last week, not often lost for words, but I've sort of lost for words describing just how much I enjoyed that.
Yeah, just finally on the game, if you do get the opportunity, make sure you check out the segment from AFL 360 on Wednesday night where John Longmire and Adam Simpson break down what Essendon did in the last couple of minutes to seal the game. The behind the goals vision they go through is a superb insight into how he set up behind the ball. We'll give you a new appreciation for Andy McGrath's leadership, as well as how some of the other players reacted, like Archie Roberts and even Zach Merritt, sort of recognising potential issues and shifting the positions on the ground or the players' positions to deal with that. And ultimately, that's one of the reasons why we ended up with the ball in our forward 50 in the last minute and a half, is because of the work that the team did behind the ball to set up at stoppage to prevent GWS from having an easy out, which prevented them from kicking the ball. Sharp was able to affect the turnover, and ultimately the ball ends up in Langford's hands, and then we managed to milk the clock there. So on this show, and we're about to do it again, we're often critical of the media on this show, but that segment certainly was top quality, the way in which they actually broke down what was happening and in a way that lay people can understand.
Yeah, it was really well done. It's a great segment, well worth checking out. If you don't want to have to sit through the whole show, it's about, I think, 23 minutes into the show, so you can fast forward to that point and watch from there. But just in terms of the last little bit, it was really, really well done, I thought. And great. There's a great conversation, great debate in our Patreon about whether Langford should have had the shot or whether he did the right thing passing it, and whether that exposed us and all of that. And at the end of the day, the outcome was the right one. How we got there, I guess, is debatable. But from the point at which the Giants kicked the goal to put them in front, so from that centre bounce onwards to the final siren, it was 22 disposals to 21, right? So both teams had almost identical amounts of the footy. We had 17 kicks, 5 handballs. They had 8 kicks, 13 handballs. So our pressure to force them into handballing was really, really high. Contested ball, we won by 2, so it was sort of neither here nor there, but we took 11 marks to their 3. So we just didn't allow them to control the footy when they had the lead or when once we had it and we were looking to protect it. So from a game management perspective, and data points, it was real positive. The other bit that I'd like to call out was Jackson Pryor was actually the first one to go and organise himself and bring his fellow defenders with him to set up. So he identified the space. So big tick to McGrath and also Archie Roberts. But in that play in particular, where once Langford took the mark, it was Jackson who identified the opportunity to go and get into that space. But he knew he needed to move some of the pawns around the chessboard to maintain that space, and he did that really well. And it was McGrath who pointed out to Kyle that the option was on. So really, really well executed. Great leadership, as you said, by Andy, and really good team connection across the board. The other bit that I liked in the last quarter, real bravery by Mason Redmond going back with the pack and ended up having to go off the ground. But because it wasn't a blood rule, the game wasn't stopped for a player to come on and replace him and get into position. So as soon as Redmond was out of danger, then the play continued. And Kyle Langford, a player I've been critical of for probably not showing enough leadership and executing well enough at times, he was the one that went back and covered for Mason Redmond to make sure that we didn't have a Giants forward on their own until that Mason's replacement could come on and relieve him, and then Kyle went back to his position in the forward line. So yeah, just some examples across the game of really good connection, leadership, organisation from people that you'd expect it from, like we've come to expect Mason Redmond to fly the flag, go back with the fly to the ball, now put his body on the line. He's been doing that for 12 months, really. He's stepped up as a leader. I think that, Andy can be a bit polarising at times, but I think those that are the Andy McGrath believers probably weren't surprised by what he did. But yeah, Jackson Pryor, Archie Roberts stepping up as a young player too. It was, really, really pleasing to see.
Absolutely. Well, look, I spoke about the media in glowing terms before. Let's correct that by getting another Damien Barrett Award nomination out there. And this is a new entry or a new challenger for the award this year. And following the appointment of Hinkley Tasmania, Will Schofield, a former Eagles player, wrote glowingly about how the Devils had handled their appointment process. Whilst doing that, managed to give the Bombers a backhander, stating, "An organised Tasmania ran an exemplary process. It looks a bit different to how the Bombers seem to be running theirs." And I think the problem for a lot of the media is that the club have run a pretty tight ship with their process. It certainly hasn't helped that one of the candidates has been running their own media campaign for the position, which has fueled speculation and has led to a lot of uninformed commentary like Will's here. I think the news that has come out this week about the initial questions that are being asked of the potential candidates, as well as the sort of people we seem to be approaching, suggests that we are actually running a proper process to find the coach. It's not a boat race. They're casting as wide a net as they can to find the best person, whether that's the figure that people think is most likely or someone no one's even considered before this process began.
Yeah, look, it's no surprise to me, mate, that the only two people in the media that are reporting on the Essendon coach search with any accuracy are Cal Toomey and Corbin Middlemans. I think they're two of the best in the business. They're away from that clickbait, headline-seeking, nepo baby world of mainstream media. They've kind of done, form their craft the hard way and come up through the ranks to get the opportunities that they have. Probably helps that they're both Essendon supporters as well. So I'm sure they probably, because they're not in that sensationalism industry and they're Dons fans, I'm sure that the club is probably a little bit more likely to lend a friendly ear to them. But you're right, as a club, we've clearly taken a path not to play this out in the media. You're also right, it hasn't helped that the fodder, at least, that James Hurd's in the media himself. And I think what the club has done is just made a decision not to respond to stories that are out there, not correct falsehoods. We said it last week that if we do that, then we're spending all day, every day doing that and not focusing on the job at hand. And that sucks a lot for Essendon fans because it means we're out of the loop and we're having to operate in blind trust. And for a lot of Essendon fans, that's hard to do given the mishaps of the past. But I feel like there's some reporters out there that are having a hard time because they're not getting access to information from the club that perhaps in eras gone by, probably not from the most recent era, but the one before that, there are a lot of leaking lips, and it's not the case anymore. And I think some are taking that to heart a bit at the moment, and running with some pretty sensationalized headlines like that one. So welcome to the club, Will Schofield.
Following the win, there was some more good news with Dyson Sharp being named this round's rising star. He certainly had an impact on the game with 23 disposals, 12 contested possessions, 7 clearances and a goal. But the thing that impressed me most was the way in which he manipulated his opponents around contest, as well as his ability to get into good positions, impact on the transition. He actually didn't have a whole lot of centre bounces for the game. He seemed to be pushing up from half forward, but it did seem like he really knows where to run and when to run. And, he's a high IQ player. And this is something I'm stealing a line from you here. You can be slow as a player, but if you think quick, then that's enough to get you an AFL career. It's when you are slow and you think slow that you run into problems. And I think, he's certainly not a speed demon, but his brain is functioning at a higher level than a lot of other players. And that allows him to have the impact that he has had. very lucky to get him where we did in the draft. And he's the sort of player you look at and you can almost lock him in for a decade or more of controlling our midfield unit.
Yeah, he summed it up pretty well there, mate. He's really impressive. I had a quick look back at our notes from last year, and it was July 24. So a year ago tomorrow that we made the comment in an episode that I'll sort of quote it verbatim. I think there's a real opportunity to start to transform our midfield this year, and I suspect that's what we'll look to do if we end up with 3 picks in the first round. There's Dyson Sharp from South Australia, a contested mid, captain of SA. He's competitive and clean. Well, I mean, he's delivering that in spades, isn't he? You and I were both really keen on bringing him to our footy club last year, and he's surpassed my expectations of him. Of teenagers that have played 10 or more games this year, he's third for clearances and third for contested possessions. Sullivan Roby's first in both those categories, mind you. So, yeah, in terms of being able to start to transform our midfield this year, or last year at the draft, we've certainly done that. I'm really pleased that he plays for us. He's got great fundamentals, right? So he's balanced, he's poised. He rarely loses his feet. Switching from defense to attack to defense is instinct for him. He doesn't have to will himself to do it. He just does it. He's brave. He's committed. He's team first. So, yeah, he's got he's got really strong athletic attributes in terms of his strength. He's not necessarily slow. He's a bit like Job, isn't he? Once he gets going, his pace is fine. He's just not fast. But yeah, he's just such a smart operator. And, with another 30, 40 games under his belt, and him building that connection with Sullivan Roby, it's exciting for what our midfield's going to look like.
Absolutely. And we're starting to hear more names about who is likely to be in charge of that midfield unit going forward next year. And going back to our coaching search and probably the news that the most put all the talk that we're not running an actual process in the shade was the idea that we've approached Murray Davis, who's currently Adelaide's director of football, but has coached the Northern Territory under-18s to their national championship, and then spent 12 years as an assistant coach at the Brisbane Lions up until their 2024 premiership. So he's certainly done a big apprenticeship, a lot of it off Broadway. He certainly wasn't a name I'd heard before he was brought up as someone that Essendon had asked to speak with prior to or for the coaching search. He has a lot of pre-Brisbane Chris Fagan vibes about him. He's sort of gone about it the hard way, but in successful programs and been a big factor in success. So I really like the fact that we've cast the net. Why? Because from reading his resume, he sounds like exactly the sort of person you'd want to be considering to coach the club as a sort of, he's got the development chops. He's been with successful programs. He's probably doesn't have a massive ego. He looks like the type of person who would get down and dirty and really work hard to build the side up.
Yeah, he's got an impressive background, mate. I have to admit I didn't know much about him prior to his name being linked this week. But yeah, I like coaches that have coached their own team. I think there's a real difference between just having been a line coach or a development coach and actually having full control of the team, regardless of what level that is. But, he's sort of ticked all the boxes, hasn't he, in his coaching career. I've got a lot of time for people who have built a career in football, having not played the game at the highest level. Having worked in the industry myself, and when I started out, I certainly had aspirations to have a career like Murray did, but I found it really, really difficult to break down some of those barriers. But also for me, I probably worked out pretty quickly that once I started having interviews at other clubs and in fact had an offer to go elsewhere, that it was the thing I loved about working in football was that I loved working at Essendon and being at that club. So having an employer pool of one's not a great career move. But I tremendous respect for anybody who's been able to build a CV and have a career like Murray has, whether he cracks it as an AFL coach or not. That's it takes a lot of commitment and grind and adherence to his craft. So my utmost respect there. And I think we can well and truly put the theory that this isn't a true process to bed, mate. James Hird might still well end up being our next senior coach, and people will still say that it's a sham if he does get that. That's unavoidable now, and it's going to happen. But confident that whoever gets this job will need to have been really well prepared, well researched, and get through a thorough competitive process in order to win it. So I'm pleased with the direction that the club's going in to find our next coach.
Absolutely. And just sort of going back to the draft and a week and a bit ago, I spoke with Rick as he went through his top 20 picks for July, or his top 20 draft rankings. And it sort of made me start to think about, again, who we're going to take with our pick. And when we wrote this down, we actually had pick one. So I think there was probably a bit of concern that there wasn't no obvious, say, Harley Reid or Willem Dersma talent there that most people had as the automatic pick one, or at least pick one in the open pool like we're here. But after last week's win, we're up in the air with what pick we're going to get. Richmond has maybe one or two opportunities to win a game and go ahead of us, and we've got, anything can happen, especially in that last game against Port where neither side might have much to play for. So we're sort of going to be in the range, and I think this week, especially with Cal's rankings and Jasper's rankings and Tommy's rankings, which came out today, it does seem to be at least a agreement on who the top four open pool players are. You've got Harry Van Hatten, which I think most Essendon fans were looking closely at at least up until this week. You've got Archie Butler, Ethan Drever, and then Gus Teixeira. They all seem to be right around that spot for the top of the open pool pick. And so we're going to get, I would say, at this stage, unless there's a bolter like a Roby, we're going to have access to one of those four. So I guess, we don't have the full choice there. One of those players is going to be off the table probably. Where are you currently at with what you like to see us take with our pick? And in particular, if Richmond do pass on Van Hatten, is he the sort of player you'd want us to take?
Just on that, I think last year was pretty open too, from memory, around this time, wasn't it? Dersma firmed a little bit later. I feel like this time last year, Duff Tyler was probably the tip for number one, and probably similar talk around him as Van Hatten, and then he didn't drift too far. Sam Laylor firmed pretty late. That draft was probably seen to be pretty open for pick one. So there's probably still a fair bit of water to go under the bridge. Archie Butler, he's got a broken collarbone at the moment and is injured and didn't get to finish the champs. There'll be underage finals and things like that coming up. I mean, this time last year, Sullivan Roby, wasn't even playing Coates League, I don't think, or it maybe just started and ends up being our number one pick in the draft. So, I don't have a fixed view just yet. I haven't watched a lot of games or a lot of footage, and I typically don't this time of year. I just tend to watch more AFL and our upcoming opponents, etc. Once our season is done, I'll get stuck into watching a lot more match footage from the underage comps and firm up my views. I like what I've seen of Butler and how he plays the game, his skill set and the way he carries himself. So at the moment, with base level knowledge, I kind of hope that we fall to pick two. I hope that Richmond take Van Hatten, and I sort of can't see why they wouldn't, because it's the part of their list that really does need another option. Nate's just about done. So I hope that decision is taken out of our hands. I'm a bit cautious about taking a ruck at the very top end of the draft. There are typically a lot of good mids and a lot of good forwards and a lot of good defenders in the pool. So you get to see them more regularly compete against players of the same size, shape, ability on a regular basis. So indexing what good looks like from the best is pretty easy to do. You don't get that with rucks. Typically, there are only 2 or 3 taken in the national draft each year. Most of the time, they're pretty raw and not physically matured. Harry Van Hatten's a bit different to that. He's well developed physically already, but not many of the guys he's competing against are. That said, again, I haven't seen all that much of them, so I'm speaking out of school a little bit, and I'm not always comfortable doing that. But I know everyone's looking at Luke Jackson and what he's doing now and making that comparison. And this is probably where I land on the decision of whether we invest, pick one or pick two on a ruckman like Harry. And that Luke Jackson's 25 and 130 games into his career now. And that's probably how long it takes rucks to get to the level that Luke Jackson is at. And so if you project Harry Van Hatten into the club and when the time it's going to take him to get to that, by that stage, Nate Caddy will be 11 seasons into his career. If you look at the top 4 right now, Jackson was recruited to Fremantle from Melbourne. They got Cox from the Pies as a backup. The Swans took Grundy from Collingwood via Melbourne. Hawthorn got Meek from Fremantle. Reeves is having his breakout season at 27. Brisbane have Draper and Fort, both from other clubs. So from a list management strategy, taking a ruck with pick 1 or 2, I think is a real huge investment. And I'm leaning towards investing in Bryan and Vicentini for the next couple of years. And if it's still a problem then, as our list starts to mature, when the young midfielders we've got have hit sort of 50, 60, 70 games, then hit the market to bring one in from another club who's 25, 26, 27, ready to go, rather than getting one in now at 18 and hoping and putting all your eggs in that basket and hoping that by the time, the rest of our mids are at their peak, that he can be too. So my view is more an overarching philosophy, I think, Jimmy, rather than about the individuals.
Yeah, well, there's still a few, as you say, there's still a few weeks to go of under 18s football, and a player could really set themselves apart and make Richmond or our job really easy. If whichever one of us ends up in pick one, or we could still be here in a couple of months' time, really unsure about which way things are going to go. Look, it's been a big episode already, and we're only just hitting our preview of our opponents this week, which is the Hawks. And since defeating the Bombers in round one, the Hawks have won 11 games, lost 5 and drawn 1. They're currently sitting in third spot on the ladder with a percentage of 118.4. So of their losses, they had the opening round loss to the Giants. Their other defeats have come against the Dockers, the Demons twice, and the Dogs, whilst their draw was against the Pies. So they're yet to face North, the Lions, or the Eagles. So I think they've actually got a pretty easy run home comparatively. So there's a good chance that we're coming up against a side that's going to be, really pushing for a top 2 spot now, given the way Sydney's sort of falling away a little bit.
Yeah, they've won 4 of their last 5, losing to the D's by 35 points in Tassie in a game where they only scored 1 goal, 3 in the first half. It was quite a strange game. Actually had the pleasure of watching that game in a pub in Hawthorn, and it was decked out with black and gold pre-game everywhere, and by halftime there was only 3 Hawthorn supporters left, and one of them was a baby sleeping in his pram. So it was a nice place to be from that. They did come home with a bit of a wet sail in that game, though. Since that loss, they've beaten Carlton by 64 points and then Richmond last week by 70.
Maybe they all left that pub because they decorated in black and gold, not brown and gold like the Hawthorn colours. But yeah, look, as you'd expect from a side in the top 4, that the Hawks are highly ranked in most statistical measurements this year. Probably the one where they're not right at the top is they're only ranked 8th for centre clearance differential, but they've been the second in stoppage clearance. And once they win it in the clearance, they've been really good at controlling it on the outside. So they've ranked first for uncontested possession differential and second for marks differential. So a lot of their performance this year has really been driven from those stoppages, winning those stoppages, and then preventing the opposition from getting the ball. And they've obviously got a lot of good ball users, and they've got forwards who are really able to impact on the scoreboard as well. So I think when we get to the preview, the game a lot of it is going to come down to how we do at stoppage.
Yeah, they're 7th in the AFL scores for clearance, 5th from centre bounce scores. It was an area, if you remember back to round 1, where they really broke the game open against us in a short space of time. There's sort of we were competitive across a lot of that game, but there was a sort of 15-minute window where they piled on the scoreboard, and a lot of that was due to centre bounce ascendancy. Over the last 5 weeks, they're actually the number 1 scoring team from clearance and centre bounce, conceded the least points from centre bounce themselves in that period, and the 4th least from stoppage. They're ranked 14th for post-clearance differential, though, over the last 5 weeks, and 18th for hard ball get differential. So, those are areas that we don't necessarily excel in, but we did see an improvement against the Giants. So, perhaps that's an area that if we can double down on what we did last week, we might be able to take something away from Hawthorn.
Yeah. I think the other thing that stands out about the Hawks is the way in which they're able to impact from intercept. They're the 3rd best intercept differential in the competition. That says a lot about the way in which they set up behind the ball, as well as the way in which they control the ball when they're moving it. They're also the 2nd best at scoring from this source. So they average over 60 points per game from intercept, whilst only conceding 45. So again, an area of the game where we've been really poor historically. So another thing to be mindful of heading into this game.
Yeah, over the last 5 weeks, they've had an intercept possession differential of -1.6. In spite of that, they've scored the 4th most points from turnover. But for a team known for its ball skills and ball movement, they're ranked 15th for defensive 50 to forward 50 transition, and 15th for defensive 50 to score. Playing much more of a forward half game, though. 2nd most points from forward half chains in the past 5 matches, ranked 12th for scores from defensive half chains. So I really do think that just emphasises how important clearance and contest is going to be for both sides this week. Both teams are going to want to play a forward half game.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving on to this week, and for once we've actually got a fully named team, because we've got a Saturday game as opposed to a Sunday twilight game, which means that we can actually, rather than speculate on who's going to be left out, we can talk about who's actually going to be in. And there has been 4 changes for the Bombers, with Bryan, Langford, Dersma and Caldwell all going out, with Blackiston, Cox, Mackay and Setterfield going in. We knew ahead of today that Langford and Dersma were going to be out, given their suspension and injury respectively. Bryan copped a lot of knocks in the last game, and also hasn't missed a game coming back from his ACL. So even if he took out the knocks that he's had, he probably was due a rest, given it is difficult to carry such a load coming back from an ACL. And then Caldwell has looked really laboured this year. He did have one of his better games last week, but he's clearly playing sore, so they have managed him there.
Yeah, Nick Bryan had the no contact hat on at training, so probably no surprises they haven't taken a risk with him. It's just Lloyd Meek for the Hawks, so it makes the ruck challenge a little, I guess, quote unquote, easier, but we'll need a big game from Blackiston. Just on Vigo, 4 games back from injury now, but he had missed, I think, 6 or 7 weeks before that, so I can understand why they've opted not to expose him to the pressure of having to carry the number 1 ruck just yet.
Yeah, you're right. I think there's a lot of Essendon fans who would have wanted to see Vigo have his turn, but clearly they think he's still a way off, both from coming back from injury and just from his age profile and being able to impact at senior level. Cox certainly picked himself after 7 goals in the VFL as a Langford replacement. My only hope is that based on selection there, they don't see Mackay coming in place of Langford and then send Cox to the wing with Dersma out of the side. I'd like to see Cox get a full game as a forward to see what he can do, and we sort of run a wing combination of Artemis and Varro and Kondo, and there's one more I'm forgetting that probably could go through there off the top of my head that I saw when I looked at the team sheet. And then you've got Setterfield, who's coming in as the defensive midfielder role in place of Caldwell. Again, there's probably people who would have wanted to see Sardis or Parrish get the go there, given their performances on the weekend. But I think that as much as they've gone like for like in terms of role there with the Setterfield selection.
Yeah, I agree, mate. I probably would have liked to have seen Johnson come in instead of Mackay. I think that might have worked, although I'm happy to see Ben Mackay back. I think Johnson could have played the wing half-forward role that Dersma had been in. That's a role that he played a fair bit at under 18 level, and it would have liked to have just seen what he might have been able to do in the forward half, but that's okay. You would hope with seeing what Huss did coming back into the senior team with confidence and applying that at AFL level. Ben Mackay played back in the VFL last week and looked to have that confidence back in his game. Cox played as a forward, kicking 7 goals. So you'd hope that they bring them back into the senior side in those positions, which likely probably slides. Jackson Pryor was the other one that maybe you couldn't recall, or Artemis into that wing rotation. So yeah, on balance, I like it, but moving into the Hawks changes, they pulled an interesting one. So Will Day picks himself, of course, but they've dropped McCabe, who's been playing as a tall forward. So I wonder if that's caught us a little bit by surprise, thinking that we needed the third genuine tall, given that the Hawks, would have the 3 talls plus Gunston as well. But you'd think now that Redmond or Pryor. Well, you'd think Redmond or Pryor could have taken that matchup, but it probably leaves Ridley now and perhaps an opportunity to intercept and get some support from Jordan on a player like Gunston, who typically likes to lead laterally.
Yeah, I think as you say, with the 3 tallish defenders in Mackay, Reid and Ridley to go up against Lewis, Chol and Gunston, it probably does leave Redmond having to play small, which I think if you had to pick between Mason Redmond playing tall or playing small, you'd want him to play on a tall. I think he's generally done better in those situations. But again, you could run Redmond on Gunston and really try and free up Ridley to play an intercept role. But I think it is going to require to run a big back line against this Hawks forward line. It's all about that pressure up the field, isn't it? And that's usually the same most games, isn't it? If you're allowing them to have silver service heading into the forward line, most teams are going to cut you up. So the amount of pressure we can put on the forward line, particularly playing a taller back line, is going to be really important heading into this game.
Yeah, spot on. And look, Hawthorn have changed their profile a little bit, haven't they? They, wasn't that long ago that they were, one key forward and then a bunch of smalls. They've gone a bit more, 3 and 3 now. So, yeah, they have shifted that profile a fair bit over recent times.
And the more space of the MCG does make it harder to provide pressure. It's not something we've really adjusted well to. I guess is how do we adapt this week to the change in venue?
It's a good question, mate. One we haven't really found the answers to in recent years, but I guess we haven't won anywhere really all that much over the last little while. I don't think it's necessarily about adapting. I think it's just about believing in what we did last week and bringing that again this week. And I think that's the value in getting a win on the board last week. You get the reward for effort. It's worth it. Players can continue to buy into what the coaches are saying and know that if they put in the effort, they're going to get that. So, yeah, I think, again, the coaches will just aim to make this a really simple game, strong at the contest, balance at contest, to then play a territory in a forward half game and then from there build our pressure. So I don't think we necessarily need to adjust. We just need to execute.
Yeah, I think, as you say, the contest is the big thing, and doing well at stoppages is one of the keys to limiting the Hawks. So they average plus 5.4 stoppage clearances per game in their wins, but minus 3.6 in their losses. So Jai Newcomb is actually the third-ranked stoppage player in the comp. We had Caldwell last week doing a really good job curtailing Oliver's impact against the Giants. So I can, as I said earlier, I can see why they've chosen to replace him with Setterfield as someone who else has shown he can limit. So I guess this week with the Hawks in, are you sending Setterfield to a Newcomb or to a Day to try and impact the game most? And I'm disappointed that Bryan has been able to follow up this week against a more established opponent in Meek after his good form last week. It makes me think that, especially around the ground, we're going to need to see more of Wright take the ruck load on. Blackerson potentially as that centre bounce midfielder with Wright taking those around the ground contests a bit more.
Mate, in the game Melbourne dominated Hawthorn in recently, Melbourne were up in contested ball 83-54 at halftime, and then contest allowed them to control the outside, and as a result they scored 8 of their 13 goals from forward half chains. I think we'll back Blackerson in. I think we need to keep structure ahead of the footy. Wright gives us that. He makes Caddy's job easier too, and we know we can't allow them to dominate in the air, so we need to keep their defenders really accountable, otherwise they'll be licking their lips and be able to dominate. In terms of where Setterfield goes, it's a tough one. Newcomb is their number one contested ball and clearance player. Day's their top-rated mid for score involvements, but only just better than Newcomb. Actually, in looking up at the data for the Hawks, I was thinking to myself, I can't wait for the day that opposition teams are asking this same question about Sharp and Roby. But yeah, I think we need to stop them at the source, and that brings me back to Newcomb. If we can restrict him, he averages 8.4 first possessions per game to Will Day's 5.3. That's where I'll be going. And I think that's a matchup that probably suits Setterfield better as well. So play him to his strengths. Will Day can get him a little bit more through transition and also take him forward and match him overhead. I think Day might be a little bit of a matchup that's better suited to someone like a Roby or a Durham who can hurt him the other way as well. I'd probably expect to see Day spend a little bit or fair bit of time forward as well. I don't think he'll be playing as a pure out and out mid.
Yeah. I think a ball control is going to be really important, both in terms of exiting our defensive 50 and entering our forward 50, given the nature of the Hawks' lines at either end and their ability to hurt us. So I guess heading into the game, what are you more worried about? The Hawks halfbacks and their ability to punish off turnover there, or the ability of their half forwards to make you pay when they get hold of the ball in their forward 50?
Yeah, like I said earlier in reviewing the Giants game, the profile of where this team is at, we're not going to get everything our own way. We're just not at that level yet. And I think even teams at the very top of their game don't get everything the way that they want it. So for me, it's the midfield. I think the rest is manageable to an extent if we're winning the contest. But I think on top of that, we will need to tidy up our exits from contest, because Hawthorn won't allow us to get away with some of the shallow entries we got away with last week. They're a much more organised defensive unit than the Giants. So we need to use our numbers better. Hawthorn have conceded the third most points from chains starting in their own defensive half over the last 5 weeks. So if we can get territory and deeper entries, then yeah, we give ourselves a chance to win the ball back off them. So yeah, for me, it's all about that midfield battle, mate, which, I mean, it has been most weeks lately, but again, that's just where we're at. We're not organised and good enough in the front or back thirds to be able to compensate for a midfield performance that's below par.
Yeah. Well, moving on to the final thought for this week, and if we're going to challenge the Hawks this week, who do you think is going to be the most important player for us to be doing well?
Yeah, sitting the fence a little bit on this one. Sorry, mate. I'm going to give you one in each third.
Like
I think Jordan Ridley down back with Reed. Yeah, I know. With Reed and Mackay locking down, I think he'll have the keys to intercept and disrupt. And if he can do that, particularly with the way the Hawthorn bring their ball in with their high half forwards, having Jordan and his ability to read the play and disrupt will be really, really important. Blackerson in the midfield, he's going to need to give us a real contest and not allow Meek to dominate, and can maybe worry Meek a little bit at centre bounce as well if our mids can read him off his hand. And then Kako forward, I think he's really ready to pop. His last sort of 5 or 6 quarters have been strong. He gives us so much energy, so a big game from him I think will go a long way.
Well, fingers crossed that we do get all three. Well, look, that will do us for this week. Thanks again for all your efforts, Jono, especially carrying the first thoughts on Sunday due to a personal issue I had. We'll be back next week to hopefully celebrate 2 wins in a row. Any final words from you, Jono?
No, it'd be nice. Good to see you, mate. I know you've had a rough week and there's been a lot going on. So good to see you and speak to you and thoughts with you, mate. Yeah, I hope there's a big Essendon turnout on Saturday. It's nice to be playing on a Saturday for a change. It's an away game, but if you can get there, get around these young group and really give them our support. Shout out to your internet service provider, mate. I'd be asking them for a refund because what they've delivered you tonight has been horrendous. But beyond that, yeah, looking forward to getting to the G on Saturday and cheering on the boys.
Cheers, mate. I'll pass on that feedback to them. For everyone else, stay safe and go Dons.